Hey everyone! So, today I want to dive into a topic that's been gaining a lot of traction lately, and that's microdosing mushrooms. Now, when I say mushrooms, I'm talking about psilocybin mushrooms, the kind that contain the psychoactive compound psilocybin. But don't worry, we're not diving into some full-on psychedelic trip conversation here. Instead, we're going to focus on microdosing, taking very small amounts of these mushrooms with the goal of reaping certain benefits without the hallucinogenic effects. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is microdosing? Essentially, microdosing involves taking a sub-perceptual dose of a psychedelic substance, like psilocybin mushrooms. The idea is to take such a small amount that you don't experience the intense effects typically associated with a full dose. Instead, the goal is to enhance your daily life, whether that's boosting creativity, improving mood, or even increasing focus. Now, when people hear about microdosing, their first reaction is often something like, "Wait, so you're taking drugs to get better at work?" And yeah, I get that. It sounds kind of out there. But the reality is, more and more people are experimenting with microdosing, and many of them are reporting some pretty interesting benefits. This isn't just some fringe thing either. There are tech workers, artists, and even some medical professionals who are looking into it. Let's talk about why someone might be interested in microdosing. For starters, there's the creativity aspect. A lot of people who microdose say that it helps them think outside the box, come up with new ideas, and approach problems from different angles. Imagine being stuck on a project at work and suddenly finding that missing piece of the puzzle because your mind is just that little bit more open. It's like greasing the wheels of your brain's creative machinery. Then there's the focus factor. Some people report that microdosing helps them stay in the zone longer. You know that feeling when you're really into something, whether it's work, a hobby, or even just reading a good book, and time just flies by? That's often called a flow state, and some microdosers say that these tiny doses help them get into that state more easily and stay there longer. But it's not just about creativity and focus. There are also potential mood benefits. Some folks find that microdosing helps with anxiety or depression, giving them a subtle lift that helps them get through the day. It's not like taking a full dose of an antidepressant or anything. It's much more subtle than that. But for some, that little nudge is enough to make a difference. Now, I want to be clear. Microdosing isn't a cure-all. It's not going to magically fix all your problems, and it's definitely not for everyone. But for some people, it's a tool that helps them navigate life a little more smoothly, and that's worth exploring, right? So, how does microdosing actually work? The general idea is to take a very small amount of psilocybin, usually around 1/10 to 1/20 of a typical recreational dose. For most people, that's somewhere in the range of 0.1 to 0.3 grams of dried mushrooms. You take this small amount every few days, often following a schedule like the Fadiman protocol, which involves taking a dose one day, taking 2 days off, and then repeating the cycle. The key here is to take just enough to feel the effects, but not so much that you're tripping. Most people don't feel high when they microdose. Instead, they might notice subtle changes in their perception, mood, or energy levels. It's kind of like turning up the brightness on your mental and emotional dial just a notch. Let's talk about safety for a moment. Obviously, psilocybin mushrooms are illegal in many parts of the world, so it's important to be aware of the legal risks. In places where they are legal or decriminalized, it's still crucial to approach microdosing with caution. You want to make sure you're using a consistent, reliable source, and it's a good idea to start with a very small dose to see how your body reacts. It's also important to consider your own mental health. If you have a history of mental health issues, especially things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, microdosing might not be a good idea. Psychedelics can sometimes trigger or worsen these conditions, even at low doses, so it's something to discuss with a healthcare professional before diving in. All right, let's pivot a bit and talk about the science behind microdosing. Now, I'll be honest, research on microdosing is still in its early stages. There are some studies out there, but a lot of what we know comes from anecdotal reports. That said, there is some interesting research that gives us clues about how microdosing might work. One theory is that psilocybin interacts with serotonin receptors in the brain, specifically the 5-HT2A receptor. This is the same receptor that's involved in the effects of traditional antidepressants, which might explain why some people find that microdosing helps with mood. There's also some evidence that psilocybin can promote neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to form new connections and pathways. This could be why people report enhanced creativity and problem-solving abilities. But again, we need more research to really understand what's going on. The good news is that interest in this area is growing, and there are more studies being conducted now than ever before. So, hopefully, we'll have more concrete answers in the coming years. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how people are actually microdosing. There are a few different methods out there, but one of the most common is to simply grind up dried mushrooms and weigh out your dose using a precision scale. You can then either eat the powder straight or mix it into something like a smoothie or a capsule. Some people even make their own mushroom-infused chocolates, which can make the whole process a bit more enjoyable. Another method is to use mushroom tinctures or extracts, which can be easier to dose accurately. With a tincture, you can use a dropper to measure out your dose, and because the psilocybin is already in liquid form, it might be absorbed more quickly by your body. One thing that's worth mentioning is that, like anything, tolerance can build up over time. If you're microdosing regularly, you might find that you need to take a break every so often to reset your tolerance. This is another reason why following a schedule like the Fadiman protocol can be helpful. It gives your body time to reset between doses. All right, so we've talked about the benefits, the science, and the methods. But what about the downsides? Well, there are a few things to consider. For one, even though the doses are small, some people might still experience unwanted side effects. This could include things like mild anxiety, headaches, or digestive issues. These side effects are usually temporary, but they're worth keeping in mind. There's also the legal aspect, which we touched on earlier. Even in places where mushrooms are decriminalized, that doesn't necessarily mean they're legal, and getting caught with them could still lead to legal trouble. So, if you're thinking about microdosing, it's important to do your homework and understand the laws in your area. Another potential downside is the risk of becoming too reliant on microdosing. Like any substance, there's a possibility that you could start to feel like you need to microdose to function at your best. This is something to be mindful of, especially if you're using microdosing to manage things like anxiety or depression. It's important to have other tools and strategies in your toolbox so you're not solely dependent on microdosing. And finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Does microdosing actually work, or is it just a placebo effect? This is a big question, and honestly, it's hard to say for sure. Some studies suggest that the benefits people report from microdosing might be due to the placebo effect, meaning that people feel better because they believe the microdosing is helping them, not necessarily because of the mushrooms themselves. But here's the thing. If someone is getting positive results, does it really matter whether it's the mushrooms or the placebo effect? If microdosing helps you feel more creative, focused, or just a little bit happier, and you're not experiencing any negative side effects, then maybe that's enough. At the end of the day, what matters most is how you feel and whether microdosing is improving your quality of life. So, where does this leave us? Well, microdosing is definitely an interesting and potentially beneficial practice, but it's not something to jump into lightly. If you're curious about it, I'd encourage you to do your research, talk to people who have experience with it, and consider starting with a very small dose to see how it affects you. And remember, microdosing isn't a magic bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems, and it's not a replacement for other important aspects of self-care, like exercise, healthy eating, and getting enough sleep. But if it's something that resonates with you, and you approach it with mindfulness and respect, it could be a valuable addition to your routine. So, that's my take on microdosing mushrooms. It's a fascinating topic with a lot of potential, but also some risks and unknowns. As always, the most important thing is to stay informed, stay safe, and do what feels right for you. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to help us bring you similar content about health and wellness. Until next time, stay well.